Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Finance Minister Arun on Tuesday announced two substantial reforms after a cabinet meeting as the government attempts to revive the economy from its worst slowdown in 3 years. The first announcement was in the infrastructure space as the cabinet approved building 34,800 kilometers of highways under the Bharatmala plan. The centre will invest 5.35 lakh crore rupees towards the plan that is aimed to connect economic corridors across the country. Overall, the government will build 84,000 kilometers of roads over the next 5 years through an investment of 6.92 lakh crore rupees, including the Bharatmala plan. The other and bigger announcement was that it allocated 2.11 lakh crore rupees over 2 years for the recapitalization of public sector banks. The plan is intended to help banks make adequate provisions against bad loans and revive lending, which in turn may help bolster a recovery in economic growth and private investment. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the government's mega plan to revive the economy. Joining me on the program today are Nitin, Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India; TK Arun, Editor, Opinion, The Economic Times; and Sudhir, Krishna, former Secretary, Ministry of Urban Development. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Sudhir, Krishna, I'd like to begin with you, of course. Over the last few weeks, the media has been speculating about a stimulus package. The government too has commented that there could possibly be a stimulus package to try and revive the economy. The stimulus package is finally here. What are your opening statements on the stimulus package?
On the two announcements made yesterday, the one about the roads, I think it's welcome. And because I always believe that roads or any means of communication is a welcome development. So that is all right. But there are issues. It's welcome in one part, but there are issues. It can't be like a recipe for sure success without other issues being handled. On the second part, I have a lot of reservations. Because the banks put together have NPA of the order of, I think, 9 to 10 lakh crore. And why that NPA situation has come about? We have to see that. By infusing capital, is it that it's a bottomless pit where we are going to put some more water to, and we go again that way? And because most of the NPAs, a large number of NPAs on account of road sector only. The major road project, companies, they have burned their fingers, and other infrastructure projects. These are the major sectors where the NPAs have come about. So if that issue is not resolved, then merely infusing capital in the banks, that too in PSUs, because the largest NPAs are with the PSUs only. So there I have some doubt. But then that's what, to begin with, I will say this much, but as we go along, we will discuss.
Sure. We'll get into the issue in depth and try and come out with some positive aspects of it as well.
Yes.
Mr. Desai, talking about the recapitalization of banks, where is all this money really going to come from? 2.11 lakh crore rupees.
If you see the numbers, they said 135,000 crores will come from bonds.
But they've not elaborated.
They've not elaborated where. If the bonds are going to be issued by the government, it will add to the deficit. My guess is they'll tweak some of the rules and keep it outside the budget. I don't know exactly what they're planning to do, but they can't afford to have 1,35,000 crores of borrowing by the government without and keep the 3.2% goal, which that seems to be determined to maintain. So I'm not entirely clear how it will happen. And also remember, it's spread out over 2 years. Second, they've said 58,000 crores to be raised by banks from the market. Now that's quite a thing. In a sense, what you're saying is...
So the banks will have to go out and get this money.
Imagine somebody coming to you saying, I have a very bad balance sheet. In order to correct my balance sheet, please invest in me. Right? That is exactly what this amounts to when you go to the market to raise 58,000 crores to clean up your balance sheet. Now, sure, there is a hunger for some of these shares, particularly by foreigners. So the money may come in. But I think what is very important is something he said, which has not been spelled out, and that is the banking reform. Because unless I am sure that they are not going to go along the same way and end up with unviable loans, then I won't put money into that bank. I will also want some assurance that the processes of managing these funds within banks is going to improve sufficiently not to land me in the same problem again. So I'd say that is quite important, and they've not said anything very specific on that. They need to say something. As far as the 18,000 crores, this is the only bit which is going to come from the budget. That's not a big issue.
Yeah.
That they can easily accommodate. So in terms of financing, But that it was necessary is obvious. I mean, look, in fact, my recollection is that the estimates of some of the rating agencies on the requirements of recapitalization of the banks for handling the NPAs and the sort of haircuts they'll be forced to take because the insolvency provisions, the Reserve Bank's requirements that 50% provision has to be made for anything sent to the insolvency court. Basel III kicking in, I think, I can't remember, Arun will remember, March? When does Basel, in a few months?
In a few months' time, yeah, I think it's March or April, yes.
It'll kick in. So I'd say that that was necessary anyhow. But my understanding is that some of the rating agencies had put the number at roughly twice.
Yeah, twice, that's true.
Roughly twice the amount that it. But nevertheless, this is a helpful beginning. It will allow banks to be able to take in lending, which they at the moment are probably very reluctant to do because of the provisioning they have to make for the existing NPAs. But he's absolutely right. The NPA resolution is crucial because it's also connected with the other part. Remember this, a large chunk of the NPA issue is the old infrastructure projects which went bad. It's not everywhere. I mean, not every infrastructure issue is a bad one. I think ports was not a bad thing. The port PPPs have not done badly, by and large. But the roads, we have had many problems. I'm sure Mr. Krishna can elaborate. There have been lots of problems. So it's very important that the two are connected in some ways.
Sure.
That we really have to get the whole act together in terms of PPP, in terms of the way we run infrastructure projects, and in terms of the management of the financial system. But nevertheless, I would say this is something which was expected. And let's see how they spell it out over the next few weeks.
Talking about spelling it out, I think Mr. Desai has raised some valid points about, banking sector reforms and how we need large-scale reforms as far as the banking sector is concerned. But there aren't too many details about, what kind of reforms we will actually see. And also the aspect of the bank recapitalization bonds, that too hasn't been spelt out. Is that going to happen over the days to come? Can you take a wild guess as to what could possibly happen as far as these two things are concerned?
Yeah. To begin with, let us say that these reforms are necessary, but not sufficient to actually kickstart growth once again. Now, there is no demand for investment by the private sector. No large-scale demand. That will kick in when they see growth actually happening and their spare capacity, which exists right now, getting exhausted. Which means, first, the investment in road projects must take place, and as a result of that investment, once you see growth happening, then the private sector will actually start investing when the banks will need to have these additional capital to start lending again.
So the onus is on the public sector spending
at the moment. Spending,
yes.
Right. Now, these are necessary parts of the game, but not sufficient. As both our panelists have said, you need to have banking reforms. Not just banking reforms. Infrastructure should be financed by bonds. So we need to talk about revamping our bond market. Long-term infrastructure, whose gestation period is long, they should be financed by long-term bonds. And there are suppliers of such bonds, our EPFO, which is on, say, 8 lakh crore worth of savings from the working public. Where do they invest it? There are avenues in infrastructure financing where such investment can safely take place. So you need to develop the bond market, and that's the necessary part of the story. Mr. Jaitley used the term indiscriminate lending, which is a very euphemism for the kind of guided lending that banks do towards projects that are favored by the powers that be, regardless of the viability of that project. Now, those kind of decision making must completely change. Now, we saw the Bank Boards Bureau being set up in the hope that this will sort of revamp the way the boards are appointed and the way they function. That hasn't gone anywhere. So, unless you have a very thorough reform of how banks function, unless you have a strong market, which then in turn finances projects, and you have projects which are very detailed in their execution plan and in their viability, you will not actually have these projects being financed by a bond market. So all these are necessary parts of the game which are yet to be put in place. Now, on the recapitalization bonds, as they explained, this might or might not be something that will add to the fiscal deficit, depending on how you interpret this. Are they below the line or above the line? Will rating agencies worry too much if this fiscal deficit is breached merely to recapitalize bonds, which is actually a way of strengthening the system rather than weakening it? There is also the possibility that some of the bonds could be issued by the banks themselves. There are the bail-in bonds, which has been discussed by the Financial Stability Board as a way of providing the total loss absorbing capacity of systemically important financial institutions. So there are various ways of doing this, but you have to first take that
It's
big
not
hit on
merely enough is what you're suggesting.
yeah, this is necessary but not sufficient.
Okay.
There are many other pieces of the puzzle that have been put in place for the whole thing to make sense.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Mr. Krishna, as far as allowing the banks to start with a clean slate, do you believe that that's what the government is working towards, helping them get a clean slate and start afresh? What then happens to the NPAs?
Well, I'm not very clear as to how the clean slate will come about, because the liability banks are not going to say that we wind up and open a new life afresh. It's not like that. Public money has gone to them and they are required to repay to the investors. So I don't think it's a very good idea to allow the banks to go on raising bonds. Anyway, they are flush with funds, with fixed deposit amounts. They do not know how to lend and where to lend, because there are no takers. Our market capitalization is not at par with the world. World is doing better than us. So there is something wrong. We have to address the fundamentals than this kind of superficial treatment given to a body which is already very weak. You cannot just give a glossy medicine file and then say that you will look very good. I mean, there's a fundamental problem. On the road side, this is a very critical thing. See, it's a symbol of how things should move. For example, roads. Now, merely making roads, it's not the first time we are doing. We have been developing national highways for decades. But the position is that the national highways are not world class. So therefore, what is different, what we require is to make the highways better than they are today, rather than making more highways which are of the same type, potholes, accident prone and so on. And the second thing is, the highway concept which we are using is borrowed from the developed countries, where the habitation patterns are different. Our habitation pattern is like people are living almost everywhere, particularly along the trunk corridors they are living. So therefore, when we are developing a highway, we should develop the hinterland also. But National Highway Authority of India is not designed to look for hinterland development. They are designed and they have decided to develop only the carriageway, not even the roadsides also, not even the drains also. They are not developing the drains enough. They are not developing the the sideways of the roads and the bypasses and the bypass roads also, kind of thing. So as a result, our highways are not leading to regional development. They are aimed at developing link connectivity between point A and B, with some few points A1, A2 here and there scattered. That is not going to help getting the optimal return from the road investment. We have to understand our country's sociology, our country's habitation pattern. So, regional economics, local economics is a very different thing. And I wish that they should do that now, not repeating what has been done earlier. Only numbers have improved. Some lakh crores was before, 1 lakh, 2 lakh, today it is 7 lakh crore. I don't think it is going to make a big change.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very important point.
Yeah, that's a very important point.
But I suspect it needs an additional program. A very important point, because I know one example where this was done is the ring road in Ahmedabad.
Yes.
The ring road in Ahmedabad was, to meet his point, was done with a land adjustment scheme.
Absolutely.
So that the whole project was seen not just in terms of the road, but the development about half a kilometer on either side of the road, and the whole land adjustment scheme was brought in order to encourage that. And you drive today on the outer ring road in Ahmedabad, and you'll see how well developed, how systematic the development is. But leave that one side. That is not today's work. Let's get back to our yesterday's announcement.
Sure.
One, do not overstate the stimulating effect of what was announced. Some of that was already there in the works. It's not as if all this 9 lakh crores is new money. Second, spread out over 5 years. What does roughly, let's say, 2 lakh crores a year extra? That amounts to less than 2% of GDP. That's not a massive boost. If we were to put it as that. And third, that basically if you want to do this, you will also ask the question of who are going to be the people who are going to implement this. Earlier you were doing it through PPPs, various people had come in, but that, at least in the case of roads, is in a slightly sick state and needs to be revamped. Perhaps it will work better in the case of ports and roads, which is also what they've talked about. That these are the three things they mentioned. One more thing, Frank. I think one of the areas that really worries me is the power sector, which is getting into deep trouble. You've seen the people willing to sell the power plant for 1 rupee. At least 2 people are willing to sell half the stake in the power plant for 1 rupee. Now, that's an example of the sorry state in which the power industry is. And I don't see how we can run a dynamic economy if one of the key parts of the economy, which is the power sector, is in serious financial trouble. Uday may have helped the state electricity boards, but the broader power sector, the private generators in the renewable sector, the private generator companies who have set up the mega plants are in trouble. So I would have liked to see something there also. Nevertheless, I would say that it's good. I hope that this will certainly help, but it's not going to deliver results tomorrow or day after. It will deliver results over time. And on the banking thing, to me, the most important thing is how do I get out of what I had in the past, which is the cronyism, which led to bad loans. I have to ask myself, what can I do on the management of public sector banks? And look, let's face it, there is a huge difference between NPAs in the public sector banks and the private banks.
Yes.
Why? So this is a question the government must ask and answer.
Do you see that issue being addressed?
I think they were tried to with the banking bureau and so on, but that doesn't seem to have gotten very far. I hope that the dilution, I understand the services secretary said they were ready to go down to 52% ownership. That was 48%.
Yes, 52%. Yeah, that's true.
48% private ownership will necessarily involve institutions. You can't get 48% private ownership with just retail investors in India. And if that is the case, I hope that certain amount of discipline gets built in. But for that, the government will have to ensure that it does not exercise its powers in order to subvert the market discipline which may come in with the 48% private ownership, which is what was talked about there. But something has to be done.
Okay.
If I'm an investor, I will say, well, I'll have to watch out. I said, till I see some evidence that they're not going to get into the same trouble, I'm not going to invest my money in this.
Sure. Talking about the GDP and the fiscal deficit targets, what are yesterday's announcements going to do for the fiscal deficit target of 3.2% of the GDP?
So, if the government actually issues these bonds to recapitalize the banks, then the fiscal deficit target will be breached, without doubt. But that breaching of the fiscal deficit target will not have the adverse consequence that mere spending spree would create. Because people will see that this is actually a responsible public finance. You are raising this money, incurring additional debt to strengthen your banks. So that part is okay. So fiscal deficit will actually widen if the government issues bonds to recapitalize the banks. That is without doubt. But that is not a major source of worry. It are the other issues. Like Mr. Desai said, how do you solve the crony problem in the banks? See, long-term infrastructure projects should not be funded by banks. They should be funded by the debt market. The world over, that is how it is done. So unless you talk about creating a debt market and financing infrastructure using debt, this will not change. See, the thing about using debt to finance infrastructure is that it is no longer up to a bunch of people sitting in a room who are bankers to decide the viability of a project. This will be vetted by any number of people who invest in the debt market. Random analysts, brokerages, credit rating agencies, pension funds, mutual funds, all of them will do their analysis. Should we put our money in this particular infrastructure project? Buy the bonds of this particular project? They look at the viability. So there is greater transparency and accountability of that project if it is financed by bonds. So that is why it is crucial to develop a bond market when you talk about having a large infrastructure spree. The second thing, as I said, is the banking reform per se.
Yes.
And that we haven't as yet have any clarity. So while the government says that our economic fundamentals are strong, the fact is that this is a hurriedly put to the package.
So this is a quick fix is what you're suggesting.
Yes. So you need to say something. So you come out and said something which are, to the extent that what they have said is fine, but then the details of what these bonds would be like, who will issue them, they are not clear. What are the banking sector reforms that you talked about and are required? What are the nature of the reforms? You don't know. So this is still an incomplete story. So that apart, if you say that there is no problem and you keep announcing fixes, then you are admitting that there is a problem, right? So there is this perception problem also with this. Let us admit there is a problem. We are using this insolvency and bankruptcy code to sort out the twin balance sheet problem. See, the big companies that are capable of carrying out large infrastructure projects, a large number of them are indebted and crippled by debt. So unless they are released on this debt, which will also simultaneously write off the loans on the banking system, you cannot execute these projects. Nobody is going to come from Brazil and Indonesia to do these projects here. We have to get our own companies back on their feet. And to do that, you might need to write off debt. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to take the political flack of the government saying it is okay for the banks to write off the debt of these private sector giants, and the resulting loss on the books of the banks will be made up from the public exchequer?
Well, the opposition has already started crying foul.
They will. So you need to spend some political capital on this. Are you prepared to do that? As Mr. Desai said, you today don't have the guts to say that unless you pay for the power you consume, we will cut off your connection. That is the root problem of the power sector. You believe in giving electricity free, or you believe in patronizing theft, and this will not work. No sector can actually survive if 30% of the output is not paid for.
Strong and stern political decisions need to be taken so as to revive the economy is what you're suggesting. Okay, fine. Let's move on now and talk about the infrastructure stimulus that was announced yesterday. Sudhir, Krishna, as far as the infrastructure is concerned, infrastructure stimulus is concerned, the government has said that it is going to create several jobs, something on the lines of Manrega. Do you believe that it's going to answer the problem of job creation in this country? Because the government has received a lot of flack for job creation too.
You see, creation of job per se will not help the situation unless and until the jobs created are leading to productivity enhancement. I mean, we cannot be, it is as good as giving doles, I mean, if we are not doing things well enough. I think a time has come now to launch a program with a clear understanding of all the dimensions. Smart City mission was launched 2 years before. Today nobody is talking about it. It doesn't seem to be taking off, to moving anywhere worthwhile, except in a few cities here and there. So rather than pondering over how the programs are not able to settle down well and move well and give returns they are anticipated or expected to, launching one more set of programs is not a good idea. Now, coming to the road proper, you see, the city roads are also important. Suppose the National Highway Authority of India owns about 1.5 lakh kilometers of road. The state highways and city roads put together will be 20 times more than that. What about those roads? If cities are in mess, if people's quality of life is not improving, if their health is not good, if education facilities are not good enough, point of making very fine roads, if at all the roads are going to be fine, there is another issue. Because the quality of road and so on, the maintenance issues are on one side. Assuming everything will be good, NHAI is able to gear up to make very good roads. Let us assume that. They will be able to overcome all the contractual disputes, which is like overwhelming, but they are not coming out directly in open as to what is all, except saying that we have resolved all the disputes, which doesn't seem to be very correct. So therefore, there is a deeper understanding required, and patience is required, and drive and commitment required to go to the grassroots level improvement of the social and economic environment to get the best of the return from the investment in infrastructure. Merely saying we will invest in road and then start digging soil, earth, and then say that I will give you wage and then unemployment is over. That's not going to take us much farther than maybe a year or in fact it might increase the inflation also on the other hand, make the life of people more miserable than before. Maybe Nitin ji can add more.
So the time has gone for quick fixes. We need to look at a multi-dimensional approach is what you're suggesting. Like TK Arun was suggesting earlier, Mr. Desai was saying that, you know, the government clearly understands that there is a problem and they are trying and, you know, solve that problem by announcing several of these measures, coming up with several of these programs. You know, but what really needs to be done to do away with this problem that we are facing as far as the economy is concerned? Because the government clearly seems like it is has taken this seriously and is trying to move forward. But, you know, the answers really don't seem that simple.
I would say that basically there's the third component in the program, which is very important, and that is the MSME thing that they've announced. What they've said, I'm not sure how much this will deliver, because right now, because of demonetization and the GST impact, the MSME sector is in deep trouble. Many of them have been shut down for months now. So, but they have certainly recognized that there is a problem there, and I understand that one of the components of this is some sort of priority lending in 50 MSME clusters and so on. I would say they should look at infrastructure is best planned so that you get good infrastructure, sensible infrastructure. That is part of a broader infrastructure framework. No point in having a wonderful road connecting the outskirts of two towns and then absolute chaos inside. I go to Gujarat a lot for my work. I happen to be on an NGO, involved with an NGO there. And it's wonderful, the highway between Ahmedabad and Baroda. But once I get off that highway, I'm traversing absolutely decrepit roads. Yeah. You know, exactly. That highway is wonderful, but once I get off it, and let's face it, more than 3/4 of my journey is off that road. So I'd say that he's very right, that please think of these things in a much more coherent way. Think of infrastructure also in terms of the broader area impact, the regional impact that he was talking of. So all these things can be done, and I think should be done. I hope that you know, they will get down to that. That's one thing. But focus on infrastructure as infrastructure, not as an employment program. Why don't you just line up thousands of people and tell them to keep peddling bicycles and generate electricity? That will be labor intensive. But that's obviously, that's an obviously absurd idea. Nobody is fortunately advocating this. So don't be so sure. One of these days somebody will. But this is India, you know. So, but the fact is, focus on employment in the right sense, which is opportunities for productive work, particularly in the medium and small sector, which is everywhere in the world. That's been the source of employment growth. But it has to be something which is connected. This is a different story about a missing middle in our industrialization. We have a lot of basic industries, steel, cement, etc. Right. We have a lot of industries catering to final demand, whether it is for machinery or even for consumer goods. But we have a missing middle outside a few sectors like automobiles. You know, so I think that's where I would start focusing attention. Okay. Because it's this middle where we will get opportunities and employment and productive employment.
Okay. Time now for one final comment to the program. TK Arun, conclude the show for us with your closing remarks.
So, as I said, these are necessary parts. So, to that extent, they are welcome. But in the absence of complementary measures, such as the debt market, banking sector reforms, and the basic thing we didn't talk about it. Unless you have social harmony, you cannot really have development. If people are scared of doing things because there might be some violence, some here, some disruption here, and your investment is not secure, people will not invest. So you need to have social stability, predictability as far as politics is concerned, you need predictability as far as tax and policy is concerned. These raids and all these don't help. So while a certain part of the current problems are thanks to disruption arising from GST, which is a desirable kind of a reform, certain other parts of the disruption that we are facing are undesirable kinds of disruption. Right. So they should be removed. Then we should move with the overall consolidation of our financial sector and ridding our corporate sector of their heavy debt burden. So these are the primary tasks to get going.
All right. On that note, then we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank Nitin, Desai, TK Arun and Sudhir Krishna for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.